Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is based on general discussion around media and virtual production. Second hour is something we'd like to spend a little more time on. And usually we talk about 3D graphics and virtual reality and all kinds of things on Wednesday. And today we're going to talk about photogrammetry. How do we turn pictures into 3D models? And we'll talk about how that actually works. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about Office Hours. So we'll talk about Office Hours 2.0, where we are and how things are working. And on Friday, we've got the folks from Teams, Microsoft Teams, coming in talking about broadcasting from Teams. And so we'll see how they're approaching this process. And then on Saturday, of course, we have the educators from 8 to 10. And our own Emily Russo will be talking about Google Slides at 10 o'clock. And that'll be back on YouTube. The conversation itself is not. So stay tuned for that. And we'll jump into the questions, Bill.
Thank you, Alex. First one comes to us from Jacob Goodnight in Indianapolis, Indiana. And he says, can the panel discuss the differences between central control versus companion? What are the use cases for using one over the other?
Go ahead, Doug.
So I use central control more than companion because I have different devices that the central control talks to. So it's just software that runs on one computer, and any other any devices on the network, you can, at least with like the TriCaster, I can talk to that through that. And I have an Behringer X Touch, I think it is, that it has auto faders. And so I can see the faders move inside the TriCaster and back and forth. So if I make an adjustment on the TriCaster, I can see it physically on the faders, which that's what I wanted, because then I don't have to change a screen on my TriCaster. I can just reach over and physically do that. I've heard people use Companion a lot with vMix, that it's a really powerful tool if you're, loads and loads of buttons on the Stream Deck. But for me, central control, just because of the number of different types of devices, I have the Stream Deck, the Behringer, and then with central control, the guy that wrote it is very accessible. So he has literally done a Zoom call with me and helped me set up things. So if I have problems with the software, Joe DeMax is he's an incredible guy. He's in the UK. And, if I have a problem, he answers it on Facebook. And so to me, to have that level of, tech support from the guy who wrote the software is amazing. So, but I'm not real too, I don't know Companion too well, so I don't know that I can talk to that.
Jeffrey?
So Central Control's paid app, whereas BitFocus Companion is absolutely free. The one biggest feature about Central Control is that you do not need a Stream Deck to use it. You can use it on MIDI controllers. You can use it on X keys. You can use it on whatever. You can actually load up Companion, use Central Control to control your Companion to go from there. So it's not bad to actually have both.
Yeah, it's basically like a subsystem that just connects all of these different pieces of hardware together, and it's all using up a lot of their APIs to get connected. And Companion's more of a telling them what to do, but Central Control really ties them together. Next question.
Next one comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, I've been going through the Swift Playgrounds lessons and find them a lot of fun. What other learning resources would you suggest for learning either Swift, iOS, or macOS development?
I think the best resource out there is Coding with Chris. So that's the coding. I think it's codingwithchris.com, and great videos, very knowledgeable, just easy to watch and easy to kind of follow through with that process. And so that's what, if you're really serious about it, or if you just want to get into something that is easy and you're still getting started, I think that's a great place to go. Next question.
Next one comes from Mike Beardmore and reading in the UK, and he says, OS X 12.2 update deleted my printer without any obvious notification. Might there be other surprises to be revealed when needing something to work as before?
Jason.
There's a really rare issue where apparently Bluetooth devices are kind of allowing this dark wake function in 12.2 that apparently can completely destroy your battery if it's sleeping. But we don't know how widespread it is, not at this point at least.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to wax on a little about printer drivers in general. They're one of the banes of my existence and have been for the 20 years I've been doing computing things. And the reason that they are is you tend to load them. You buy a printer, you keep a printer for many years often. I mean, some people change them rapidly, but if you find one that works and you stick with it, in the middle of the time that printer, and more importantly, that printer driver is sitting there functioning away, there's all sorts of changes in the system. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had something happened, I wasn't even thinking about it, and it's because something updated overnight, but the printer driver used to rely on some bit of code that was in that old system that's now been replaced. And suddenly I have to go through a day and a half of trying to find printer drivers, download them, test them, and get them back in place. So I'm always a little bit leery. I think more important, keeping all your little peripheral drivers and things like that as updated as you can, so that there's a chance that they'll work as system updates continue.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, have you ever used Little Snitch on the Mac as a host-based firewall? Currently, I use AdGuard for ad blocking, but I'm wondering if Little Snitch would be more comprehensive.
Jason.
This is kind of apples and oranges. Little Snitch is designed to prevent the apps that you have from going out, not from ads coming in from a website that you've solicited. So not quite the same thing. I wouldn't use it for ad blocking.
Yeah, Little Snitch tells you all the information going in and out of your computer. So every time, every app, everything, if they're going out of your network, out of the network adapting of your computer, it's going to tell you what's happening. So it's a much more comprehensive thing, and it can get a little overwhelming if you leave it on and don't, target it. But it is useful if you're trying to figure out, is something actually going out and doing something. Little Snitch can tell you what that is. And so it's a very useful little utility. Next question.
Tim Mann in Melbourne, Australia is up next. Is it a bad idea to use D-size neutrik HDMI feed-throughs with ATEM Mini?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. We've used a lot of D-size. We've never had a problem with them. So, I mean, a lot of these are connectors that you would put inside of a modular system. So if you have a modular convenience panel on the back of your rack, you can put these little throughs, and some of them can be Ethernet, some can be HDMI, some can be SDI. And they have HDMI ones. I'm pretty sure they're just, connecting throughs. They're not doing any processing. So it should pass everything through it that was going through. It's just metal to metal. It's just like a piece of the cable. So I don't think you're going to have any trouble with it, but I haven't tested it specifically with an ATEM Mini. Next question.
Jason Bache in Albuquerque, New Mexico is up next. He says, during my time in Denver, I was porch pirated. Can anyone suggest a package security box to prevent this from happening?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I know lots of people who use the Amazon service that exists at Whole Foods. So they have the package delivered to boxes at Whole Foods. Either that or get to know Mark Roper and get one of his packages.
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, all that glitter going everywhere. I did notice that here in the Northwest, the drugstores are also using that Amazon boxing services, so that you go in and find their lockers back somewhere that's in the secure space. And I also noticed that I'm getting a box from B&H, and it gives me the FedEx option of pick it up at a location rather than have it delivered to my site.
Go ahead, Bill.
Next strategy is to make good friends with your neighbors, which is what I used to do in a place where I had a little bit of exposure there. And that combined with a door camera meant that I knew as soon as a package dropped, and I would have my neighbor come over and pick it up for me.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I bought something called a Yale smart delivery box with Wi-Fi, and it alerts you when they've opened the box and closed the box. Then you've got a package.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, at CES, I saw a couple new ones coming out, and I'm supposed to be getting them in for review. The only concerns that I have with them is you put those on your porch, then somebody knows that you get a lot of packages on a regular basis, and so they might be monitoring your box to see how that works. And then, of course, it really depends on if that UPS driver or Amazon driver decides to actually use the box and put it in there. I'm kind of lucky. I have a driveway that wraps around, so I can have them put packages in places that people cannot see on a regular basis.
I never know where they're going to leave them around my house. There's like 4 places that I have to check if I see something that was dropped. Fortunately, a lot of times Amazon will take a picture of it, so I'm like, oh, it's there. So, but it's somewhere in the area. They sometimes it's in front of my garage, sometimes behind the garage, sometimes it's in one door, sometimes another door. I go, it's Sky.
We used to make sure that at Christmas time, the mail person would be gifted something, piece of chocolate, hot drinks, something to show our appreciation. I was on a call with Jeff Keefley the other day, and he said, "Oh, just a minute. I have to be nice to my UPS man because he is my lifeline." So there's a possibility making friends with your delivery people.
I have stairs that go down to my front thing, and there's some people that will take it down, and some that obviously just threw it, just like threw it down. I'm not walking down the stairs. The good news is that you have someone in your area that's doing porch pirating, which means that there's a huge opportunity to deliver yourself a package that has cameras and trackers in it, and turn it into a YouTube video. Like I've thought about it for a long time, but I don't have I'm not in an area where there's any porch pirating. And so if there was a porch pirate in my area, I would absolutely do something that would end up on YouTube.
It's so tempting.
I'm just telling you, I will warn you that my wife says I'm not allowed to do that because she's afraid that the person, whoever it is, will take it personally. But it's so tempting. Anyway, all right, next question.
Next question comes from Tim Mann in Melbourne, Australia. And Tim says, recommended upgrade for this monoprice matrix. And then he has the link there for it.
I looked at that. There's so many. So the ones that I've used that are smaller are from IO Gear. They're a little bit more expensive, and I think they're like a 4:2 or 2:2. So those have been the ones that I've used in the past that are smaller matrices, like the just a 2:2. This is a 2. What he's asking for is a 2:2 HDMI matrix that you can kind of pass through. And I don't buy ones that small anymore because I just have so many things I want to connect to so many other things. It's the ATEM Mini that kind of changed all of that for me. So I'm actually I'm in the market for a 16x16 matrix switcher right now. So, but there is something you do want to look for, and that is 4K 60. That's going to tell you that it's at it's going to be more expensive, but you're looking not 4K 30, 4K 60 is a jump in the chipset that belongs to that matrix. Go ahead, Jason.
Last time I looked into this, OREI had a decent one that was 2x4 or 2x2.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I haven't had that. I haven't tried that one yet, but definitely. Next question.
James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland is up next. Thingverse is a great resource for free 3D printable objects. How can one get started with 3D printing using public library printers? What programs are needed and so forth?
Okay, Jeffrey.
So first of all, it's Thingverse, just so you know. But basically, there's a lot of different websites out there, especially depending on your printer. Like for instance, Creality, which makes the Ender series, which is what I have. They have their own website, which they also have a lot of repetitive stuff. So you find it on Thingverse, you'll find it on these other websites as well. The only time you don't find it on Thingverse is if you're actually paying for the model itself. Now, the only thing, if you're doing it from a library, you have no control over the software. The one thing that you'll probably end up doing is you'll probably be getting like a TF card, a small micro SD card. You plug it in to use from there. So the biggest piece of software that a lot of people have is called Cura, C-U-R-A, and that's what you load up the print with to see how it looks. You can't edit it, but you can definitely make some changes, like resize it or angle it on how it's going to print on the printer. And the only other piece of advice is have a lot of patience, because as I was told when I started 3D printing, this is not a job, this is a hobby. No matter, even if it is your job, it's a hobby, because it can go south really fast.
Yeah, I have the Ubiquiti Tech 3D printer, and I like them to be enclosed. There's something about I don't like the printer being open, so it's an enclosed one, and it comes with its own software that's a little funky, but it works on the Mac and PC. And basically, I don't use any of the Wi-Fi connections or anything else. I just put it on a USB key, as Jeffrey was talking about, and I just put models on it. I find it to be, Thingiverse is a great place. Sketchfab has some stuff as well. There's if you do a search for 3D printable objects, you can find a lot of them. You can also get ones. With a little bit of work, you can usually you can get you can download stuff from the Smithsonian and print it if you want. There's an incredible 3D library in the Smithsonian, and some of them are actually watertight, or you can make them watertight. When I say watertight, basically they can't have any holes in the geometry, otherwise it doesn't know what to do with that. Although the Ubiquiti tech, if I give it a non-watertight one, it'll make it watertight. Basically, what it does, what the 3D printing software does, is you have a model that is just a volume, and then it has to figure out how to fill that volume in with a structure, and you get to play with that structure and figure out how dense you want it to be and what kind of hatches and so on and so forth. But it's actually creating some stiffness to it by creating that structure inside. And I got to say, it's a lot of fun. Like, it's a lot of fun to build things. I would highly recommend it. You can do something at the library, but what'll happen is it'll slow down your iteration rate. I would go ahead and get something like what Jeffrey has, or something like what I have, or an inexpensive printer, and start printing stuff, because it takes a long time to print. so time is the real issue there. So a good print might take 3 or 4 hours, or 20 hours, or 18 hours, or something like that. And having it somewhere that is not yours is just a real bummer. So I would highly recommend getting something. When you're looking for a printer, again, I like mine to be enclosed. I like it to be easy to swap the. I don't really care about the self-leveling. I think that you pay a lot extra for that. You also, but I do care about the volume. So I think mine is at it's like 10 by 10 inch volume, which is pretty large. A lot of them are like 5.5 inch squares. 5.5, you can get a lot done with 5.5. I just wanted bigger because there's things and I'm glad I did that, because even now I have to kind of oftentimes angle things to fit inside the volume that I'm using. So you definitely want to think about that as you start to work on it. And then when you get really good at 3D printing, you'll start thinking about CNC. All right, next question.
Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next. He says, can you continue to use an iPhone for video recording after it's no longer connected to a cell service?
Go ahead, John.
You can. I use this for my son all the time. For just if he wants to take a fun video, do some YouTube stuff, I can hand him one of my old phones. It's going to be quality. He can have some fun, learn something. So it's a really great tool to kind of pass down your older phones if you're keeping them past the 2-year contract.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, of course you can. You can record with them. You can even stream over Wi-Fi with them. It's, I've got all these old iPhones. I feel guilty that they're not doing anything right now.
Hey, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and one thing you might want to get, I think I have it. Yeah, I have it in this case somewhere, but get something like the GL iNet Slate, and you could definitely hook it up onto your network. But if you go out and do a lot of things, I've used my old phones for streaming in places where I couldn't take a lot of gear with me. Like, for instance, when I went to South Korea, I always had to limit the amount of gear. So I'd take a couple phones with me and then hook it up to the router and then bring it into the computer. And then I could use NDI or Filmic Pro or something like that to send the video for a live stream. It works really well.
Yeah, and pretty much the phone will do everything everything other than the cell service. So, with Wi-Fi and everything else, you can just use it that way. I use them when we're doing the cooking things with Damianti and my 2 of my cameras are phones, and they don't have any cell service. They're literally just phones that I used I have their older phones or their test phones or something like that, but they don't have any cell service. They're just used for their video. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Robert Soji in Los Angeles. What does Calibrate actually do when you select it under the monitor system preferences on a Mac?
Go ahead, Jason.
All right, I haven't done this in a while, but the last time I remember doing it was basically just setting the gamma through a visual series of cues and then maybe some secondary calibrations. But it's basically like a way to kind of get your gamma right.
They took all the good stuff out. So most of that stuff is that you visually do. It used to have like 2 little things that you try to match them up, and then you try to match these things up, and where do you see the gray? And it was actually pretty great, and they've taken it all out. Apple took it all out. I don't know why. Probably because it wasn't that accurate, but it did do a pretty good job of getting it where you wanted it. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, make sure your monitor's warmed up. In other words, it's been on for at least a half hour, and then just press the calibrate button and the option key at the same time and follow the prompts. It'll walk you through it.
Yeah, the best thing to do is if you really want a calibration, then you want to get something like a Spyder. So because how can it calibrate if it doesn't know what the monitor is doing? So if it can't talk to the monitor, it doesn't know what that is. What Spyder does is you put it on. It's a little device that you put it onto your monitor, and it's measuring. It's actually looking at the monitor and then making adjustments and building a profile for your computer that meet whatever that monitor is set to. It's going to look right. And it does a really good job. One thing that by the way, I found looking for something else, I just kind of ran across it, is there is a projector setting now in the monitors section. And that projector lets you fine tune your black levels, white levels, and gamma. And what that's useful for, we noticed that coming out of Keynote, if I went a video into Keynote with a live video and then back out to another switcher, that I was getting really contrasty. And you can fix all that. Bill, your mic's open. And you can fix all of that with the projector setting. So you can play with all of those things and make it look a lot better, which has helped a lot with some of the live video in Keynote that I've used. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Sky Gleason in Seattle, and he says, for those that use mic arms, where did you mount it on your desk and why?
Go ahead, John.
I like to put mine right next to me so I can quickly lift it out of frame as I'm speaking. That doesn't work well, but I like to be able to get it out of the way so I can do anything else I want to do. That's where I've had the best luck. I moved it from side to side. I ended up putting a monitor over here, so then I swung it over. I just want it out of the way so I can see everything. And then the mic can sit nicely in front of me.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I have one of the Elgato low slung arms, and what I do with mine is it's on the right-hand corner front of my desk, which allows me to push my mic away from me. I spend a lot of my day on Teams when I'm not doing Zoom. So if I move the mic away, then I forget where it is, and if I've just pushed it forward, even though it might be quite low, I can still be heard.
Yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I mounted I have two monitors on my desk, so I put it in between the two monitors at the back of the desk. And I also mounted a webcam on top of the boom arm, like Chris Fenwick did also. I think that's a trend. I think people are doing that, but it makes it real useful to have the integrated camera boom mounted at the back of the desk.
Go ahead, Bill.
And I'm lucky. I have a 2-tiered desk that's got a meter bridge over the top of it, which means that I was able, whoops, wrong button there. I was able to mount my mic arm to the second level, which puts it up high generally. That also, though, means that it clears everything below that. So when I swing it out of the way at the end of the show every day, it literally just sits over against the right wall, and I never have any problem with knocking anything off the desk or whatever. So if you're lucky enough to have a meter bridge or a second tier of your desk, I highly recommend putting it up there.
Yeah, I have a kind of a work table right next to my table, and I just recently moved this to do that, because now you don't hear, when I was typing before, you hear this dum 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 dum, and that all went away because I just put it on another desk, so the vibration wasn't actually going there. So having it attached to something else turned out to be useful, and I'll probably take that along as I design my next desk. Next question. Sarah Doyle is up next from Falls Church, Virginia. Anyone virtually attending the remote production conference? Go ahead, Jeffrey.
We saw that yesterday, and we started looking into it a little bit. It's February 4th and 5th. There's a free ticket that you can get. There's also a VIP at $199. We're doing the free ticket, of course. They've produced some other events, like some things on NAB and some things for Adobe. Their main company is called Future Media Conferences. So and it's got no, it says conferences. Future Media Conferences, yeah. And it's got about 40 people. The only person I recognized was Photo Joseph, but I don't follow the names in this space too much, I guess. So, but it's worth a check. See what happens.
FMC has been doing this for a long time. They managed before they went doing all these virtual events. They basically managed like all of the event, all the post-production conference at NAB and lots of things like that. So they have a lot of experience with that. And I will say that they pivoted very well. So they, a lot of these conferences are actually, have some good people in it. I actually know most of the people in that list. And because we've all been in the same FMC stuff for many years. So I think the most recent one that I spoke at for FMC was at the Final Cut user group, or the Final Cut virtual conference or whatever that happened in the fall. So, but they put on a good show. So if you're thinking about it, it's probably got some value to it. Next question.
Nick, it looks like Grinchmeyer in Topping, Virginia, not West Virginia, says, looking for ideas and suggestions, planning to introduce video production at a local teen night. Basketball, craft room, and youth band are the key activities. Planned workstations, he's looking for ideas on that. Interview team, switcher, graphics, and an audio board.
The thing that I find is the most popular in most of these things is green screen. A good green screen will create a line. You know, we were at Macworld and one year, and Macworld gave me a 20 by 20 space in Macworld, and I didn't have any money to fill the space. Like I didn't have any. Like I was, this was Pixel Core, and this was before we were doing any production. It's like 2008 or 2009, and so Macworld gave us a 20 by 20 space to use, and I didn't have any money to build a booth, and so all I did was I had a desk, and I put up a green screen, and I had conduit, and so we just did a live green screen compositing in front of different backgrounds. You could choose the background, you could do it, and it wasn't even. I don't even think we recorded it, I think maybe we recorded it, and gave it to people, but I don't think we did. I think people just got to see it, and all these huge companies were all around us with, this was, Natural Speaking and all these other huge companies, and they had a handful of people going through it. We had a line that was 50 deep to play with the live green screen. So, and you see that at science centers and everything else. You give people, kids of all ages, enjoy green screen. So I would think about how you can and play with composites, especially if you can do things that are kind of foreground, background kind of things that are going to go around them. And those are little things, you can have little things like flying, like a little bird flying around, because you're now using that key to do something, around the person. People enjoy it. Anyway, just something to think about. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, check into After Hours. There's a guy named Christopher. Someone here help me out with his last name. I can't remember it right now, but he works for Willamette College in Oregon, and you can watch him during office hours in action, making up Ethernet cables and making up rigs to do basketball games and activities at his college. You can learn a tremendous amount just by watching him in his day-to-day stuff.
That's great. Jeffrey?
I'm reading this question two ways, and the one way I'm reading it is that you're going to actually be putting the kids behind the cameras, behind the switchers, and behind the graphics stuff. But if it is the other way, I would highly suggest that that you do that. Have a kid running around with a camera, and get the shots, bring it back, and then do some post editing with that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
The only thing that I can't help but add to this is that it is ludicrously fun. The first time teenagers figure out that if you take a green smock and put it on a well-lit key, the jack-o'-lantern effect is magical.
The other thing to think about is just little video projects that cover the event. The very first Pixel Core project ever was that I can't remember whether it was Robot Wars or BattleBots, but basically we took a bunch of teams, and this is, all college students and above, and we had probably 10 or 11 teams, and they went and each one of them followed different teams through BattleBots and just shooting video. She shot a bunch of video and then cut it all together. And I think it ended up on their website. But it was a great, kind of a team building project where you just got to cut everything together. And I've done a lot of those where if I take my kids somewhere, I'll just shoot a bunch of little bits and pieces of video of them doing stuff and then put it all to a little music and then done. And it can be a lot of fun. It's amazing what you can do if you have a music track. You just throw things together, cut to the beat, cut to the bar every once in a while, and it looks good. Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles is up next. For bringing in a remote guest, what would be the advantages and disadvantages of using LiveToAir over some of the Zoom solutions?
LiveToAir has just a lot of creature comforts for production. So you're able to queue people up. You're able to have talkback within the computer. You're able to have a lot of those bits and pieces. Now, we tend to use just a big, we have a big structure around Zoom, and we're using breakout. The nice thing about Zoom is that we can give everybody a breakout room. Everybody comes in. We move everybody to the place that we're going to record them in, and we just have a lot of control, and we just know how to do it. But I think that LiveToAir has some advantages of basically the production front end that lets you really route and queue people for kind of a larger production. Next question.
RJ Rood in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Up next, which tutorials or instruction videos are recommended as guides on the path from Fusion 360 Beginner, a fresh install, to USDZ object production?
I think the question is how much data, how much quality do you want in the USDZ? If you really want it to look good, there's not that many good paths right now to getting into USDZ. And Chris Fritchie would probably be a better person to you might want to ping him. I know he found a web solution that I just can't remember off the top of my head. What I do is I'm going to export the models out of whatever modeling package I have as OBJs. But there's a key here is that you have to set your UVs. So the UVs are basically the XY coordinates across the surface of an object. You have to define those UVs first. And I have never tried to do that in Fusion 360, but you could do it definitely in Blender, which is free. And basically you can define those. I do it in Cinema 4D. Chris Fritchie does it in Modo, but you basically define, and that just tells you how you're going to map things. And then the best way to get photoreal solutions in USDZ is really using Substance, which is an Adobe product that costs money. It's a subscription. Substance 3D is going to let you import those models. And now you can just start throwing surfaces onto them. You can really make stuff that looks very, very photoreal, and then it'll export. It's funny, the Substance is a weird thing. You export as textures, and then you say, oh, by the way, I want to export the textures with the USDZ model. Well, the USDZ model has all the textures on it, but it has so it outputs all these pictures that you don't need, and then what you pull out of it is the USDZ model. And that's how we've done some of the most photorealistic stuff that we've done so far. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, this doesn't involve Fusion or photorealistic, but I was talking with Fritchie last week about doing like architectural add-ons to homes. Like, let's say you get Home Depot to pay for making USDZ models of like an outdoor kitchen that you could install in your backyard, and you could place it and spin it around. And I actually came across I didn't look into it, but there's a plugin that allows you to take stuff out of SketchUp and create USDZs out of it. Nothing like the quality that Chris does, but just an interesting little side note on USDZ.
USDZ is going to be a big deal. Like it's going to be a huge deal. So we are. Jesse Schwartz and Chris Fritchie really spent a lot of time as we were working on a project figuring out how to actually get that out. But it does let you do all that visualization of these objects. And there's a lot of things that Apple builds into it. It'll simulate the lighting. It will put it in. And because all these phones have LiDAR, they know what the scale is. So now what you can do is it'll just pop in. And I think I said this maybe yesterday or a couple days before, I can remember where. But I was going to get a thing under my TV, and it literally just popped in at scale, lit in my house under my TV, so I could see what it would look like. And I went through a couple different ones, and I thought, okay, that's the one I want, and ordered it. That's the future, and we're going to see more and more. It is going to be the demand, and I still think that the shoe that will drop, and this is why I just want people, and especially because we're talking about 3D today, the shoe that's going to drop is that Apple will eventually make this available in their Office apps. And when it hits Keynote, Keynote is the driver, in my opinion, of model creation. AR will be cute, but being able to take 3D objects that you're talking about and rotating them around in Keynote, even if you're never going to rotate them during the presentation, just getting them in the right position. I want to have these 3 objects, and I want to move them around so that they look like they belong in the same place with a little drop shadow, like that type of thing. That's going to take the presentation to a whole nother level. And if, by the way, in the presentation, you could rotate it around and animate it and so on and so forth.
Oh, with Magic Move? Oh,
yeah, exactly. Oh, I want to rotate it in 3D by hitting a button and having it go like this, then go like this, then turn over here. Then you have little highlights popping around it and so on and so forth. When it comes to education, sales, all those things, it's going to be explosive. And so everybody's going to want models. Now, the thing is there's going to be a huge demand for models, but not at the current price. The current price of Turbo Squid is like $50 each and $100 each and $150 each. What people are going to want are collections of 25 for $10, a whole bunch of little cars or a whole bunch of this, a whole bunch of that. And whoever does that first is going to make $1 million. There's so much money there right now. And so, anyway, so it's just got to be timed for when it comes out. But the Keynote, and they have to be high quality and look pretty. Average people don't know. They won't know why it looks, like people look at 3D models and they're like, oh, well, it's a 3D model. But you can make them look photorealistic, and you do need to make them very high quality, to have people really get into it. But I know that the USDZ model that we built for Clarity, which we've talked about here. If you go up to clarity.io, you can download their sensor, and it will jump onto your desk at scale, and it looks almost identical to the real thing. And that's the, being able to have people imagine, they can literally, oh, what would this look like on a post? Oh, I can just place it there. And so those things are going to be really, really powerful. So anyway, we'll talk a lot about 3DZ, USDZ on Wednesdays. Go ahead.
You mentioned the scale. Preto has a USDZ of his rocket that Fritchie made, and it's it's cool. But it's 12 feet tall, and I couldn't open it in my apartment because the camera was like, nah, you don't want to open that in here. It'll go through the ceiling. I had to go outside to open the USDZ of the rocket.
And you can't just, you can squish it.
I didn't. I'm not that smart. You know me. I'm bad at 3D.
Well, but like I've been still working on. I took a little time off because I was doing so much production, but I've been still working on my new studio, and I model it and I export it out as USDZ all the time, and I can walk around it with my phone. I can walk around the new studio, and that's what's made me think about, oh, this didn't work, and this isn't going to work, and this isn't going to work, because I have a USDZ model of every time I built my studio. Is I can sit there and go, oh, I think this and. It's going to be, it's building up. What's holding it up right now is that the pipeline is painful, to build it. So if you don't use Houdini or Maya, all the other things are just like you have to build part of it over here and move it over there. So it's hard, but this is the time to get into it, because, you get into it when it's hard, not when it's easy. Once it's easy, everybody's doing it. And so, I got into drones when we crashed them a lot, because they just took off the wrong way and they did all this other stuff, but there weren't any laws, there weren't any rules. We just flew our drones everywhere and everything else. And now it's, now it's easy, but now there's a lot of restrictions and everybody has one. So anyway, it's I would highly recommend. We're going to keep. That's part of why we're talking. We're not going to talk about photogrammetry. USDZ today. We're talking about photogrammetry, but photogrammetry feeds into USDZ. Next question.
Josh Kaufman's up next from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He says, how might a Spyder calibration tool be used on a computer monitor to best view Office Hours 2.0 HDR feeds? After turning off all the automatic features in the monitor settings, how close should a panel with, for example, around 550 nits peak brightness come into an iDevice?
Go ahead, Jason.
There are two things at play here. The first is, how accurate can a Spyder make a monitor? And the answer is pretty accurate. But what it can't do is take an SDR monitor and turn it into an HDR monitor. With respect to an iDevice, the most recent iPhone 13 Pro, I think, is 1200 nits max brightness, 2,000,000:1 contrast ratio. You're not going to hit that with any but the very, very best monitors.
I will say that you will notice. 550 is still technically HDR. Because it's but it is. I think that it'll always look a little dull, but it will look a lot brighter than your regular monitor. And so, and the big thing is you'll have a lot more detail. So more detail in the highlights, more detail in the shadows. That's what really HDR gives you, more than just dynamic range. It gives you dynamic, but more than just brightness. It gives you dynamic range of details in highlights and details in shadows. I'd say it gets 80% there, 70-80% there, because you don't. The middle of it is what you're mostly paying attention to. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, one reason why the Super Bowl halftime show is live to track is because of the time it takes to sound check a typical national, international level act. Would reducing the input count and thus sound check time help mitigate that issue?
Go ahead, John.
I really think it comes down to risk, and it's not really to worst the show in order to have live instruments. It's just not a really big return on investment there.
Yeah, Bill.
Also, the delay in anything like a stadium size thing, any musician who's playing live there and not to track, it just gets all out of whack really quickly. I used to be the stadium announcer for a indoor soccer league, and I had to completely reprogram my brain to hear myself coming back a half second off of the slap back from the other side of the stadium. It's hard.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think aren't most of the shows pre-recorded, because there've been a number of, I think in a past year there was noticeably their guitars were unplugged and so on.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So you do a sound check, and you do a sound check in an empty stadium, and then people get in, and then all of a sudden that check has completely changed. Also, musicians don't know how to not turn up their volumes on their guitars and amps.
Yeah, what they do in the halftime of the Super Bowl is just astounding. Like it's just the flip of bringing that many people out in those stages and everything else. I mean, we're always like, I want to set everything up the day before, and then I want to test it, and then no one's allowed to touch anything. And that's all the opposites of what they do there, and it's a huge lift, to make that work. And so it's I think that they would not want to add that. And a lot of big shows are playing to there's some tracks or all tracks or everything but the voice. Even though there's people out there, there's a lot of that happens in concerts just to reduce the complexity. Next question.
Jeffrey Powers, Madison, Wisconsin, here on the panel says a major storm is passing through the U.S. today. How do you keep your gear safe, especially those that have larger amounts, production trucks and the like?
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just have a lot of tarps on hand. Just you can throw them over your truck and not worry about leaks and things like that. I have a lot of RVs around my property, and I keep a lot of good tarps on hand.
I get them under something. Go ahead, under like something physical. Go ahead, John.
I'm wondering what happened to Doug Ferguson. He was in the middle of the storm last night, and he's got a trailer outside.
How'd it go, Doug?
It's only 40 degrees and raining right now, so I'm not. I mean, if it snows, it snows. I got to shovel to the door, but everything's inside. But a lot of the times when I get home after a production, I take the equipment out because nobody told me that I needed all the storage for all the cables. So if that's a lesson learned, if somebody is going to build a truck, it's just the storage capacity of everything that you got to do with the truck. I mean, all the gear stays in the rack and all that's nice, but it's just the cables and the cable guards and the fiber and all that mess. Like,
yeah, the best. I think we have a similar trailer that I had a similar trailer. Did you get the MarkerTech one? Was that the one that you?
Yeah, it's a Hallmark. No,
yeah.
Jeff Keithley is the one that built it. So it's a custom build trailer.
We bought the MarkerTech one. I think it was the 24-foot MarkerTech, and then we tore half of it out and put our own stuff in. Like slowly, we just took the tables out and got more and put a bunch of other customized it a lot, put monitors all around it. And the best thing that we did is the truck that we pulled it with was like this giant Chevy 350 or something. And what we did is we really paid for building this like almost a workman's rack in the back. So there's all these compartments, and then there was this huge center area that was open that you could fit a lot of stuff into. And it was all lockable, of course, and everything else. And it had rails on it and everything else. So the truck itself basically stored everything that we needed for the trailer. And anything else there we had delivered. We had we also had two sprinters. So the sprinter would carry the other stuff if it needed to.
I definitely utilize my truck that pulls it. Yeah, the gear is in that as well. And you have to really pay attention to the weight. I mean, you really have to balance it out because I have gone down the highway sideways.
Yeah. Well, and also it taps the back, like you'll tap, if you get it and it'll start pulling your truck up. If you get too much in the back of the trailer, it becomes a whole new problem. You get over stuff and you're tapping the back corner. We had a problem with that. Anyway, next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, again says, during this Midwest weather event, I was doing some mobile streaming using an iPad and a clicker remote other than the 6-button Stream Deck. What small controls have people used?
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, so maybe I misread this, but who has a pickle? Like, to me, that is just immediately the small control of choice for just about anything. It's not quite a good fit, though.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, there's an outfit called TNP, and they make a clicker that kind of looks like the remote that comes with your iMac. Or not the iMac, the Apple TV, and that's a pretty good clicker.
I mean, as far as I'm trying to separate all of this stuff out, but the clicker that almost all of us use is the DSAN Perfect Q. If you're looking for a clicker, this is a slightly different subject, but if you're looking for a clicker for a presenter, there's one that everybody uses. There's one that everybody uses when they don't know that this one exists, or they put off buying it because it's expensive. But there's just one company that makes the clicker that everybody uses in every major event, and that's a company called DSAN. It's called a Perfect Q, and they make a little one. I think I have one here. Hold on. This is the one I put in my bag. Ooh, got the ASMR there. So this is the receiver, and this is the clicker, but this is the clicker that everybody uses for everything. I have a big version and a mini version, and then this is the pocket version. But it's all the same, and it'll go hundreds of feet, and it always works. And the only mistake it makes is when the speaker makes a mistake, or the operator, because you can set it to either just give you a symbol or actually change the slides. Next question.
Next question from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. How do you find a good telemedicine doctor?
I think for Kaiser, I think they all became telemedicine doctors. Like what's amazing that's happened after COVID is that they went from you always have to go in to see the doctor to every first appointment now is telemedicine. Like I was amazed at how that just transformed. And I've gotten to the point where I vastly prefer it. Like if I have just some questions and I have an ailment, I really don't want to go all the way in. I actually don't want to interact with people, so I don't have to. I can just come in when they're available, and I have my phone on hold, and then I show them whatever or talk to them or whatever I want to do there to say I got something like my hand doesn't work or so. They're not going to do anything on the first one anyway. And then if they can't figure it out, then you can go in and take a look at it. And so I think it's a pretty it's a huge jump forward. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, we just experienced, because we moved from Arizona to California, we had to do all new doctors and the rest of that. So it seems to me that medicine is undergoing a tremendous shift. And one of the things that I've noticed out here, I don't know whether it's across the country, physicians groups and clinic groups and things like that are very mindful of customer service, because everybody's talking about them on all the websites. So they have to do a pretty good job of taking care of people, or they'll get called out really fast. So I've actually seen an increase in the amount of attention that medical professionals have paid to me as I've going through just the process. I've got no chronic things, and I'm very fortunate and thankful for that. But I just wanted to get into a system, get to know the doctors, and I see more teamwork. And so it's not just a doctor. You may have a primary care physician, but they're really quickly to send you to specialists and other people. And then the clinic structure means that I actually have multiple places I can go rather than going to a doctor's office. And everything in the back end in terms of billing and insurance and the rest of that has been handled by really professional people in the case that I'm seeing it. So these distributed networks of physicians, I think, are turning out to be a good thing. At least they've turned out to be a very good thing for me. Big difference from the old days, but it's been positive for me getting into a new system.
Yeah, good, John.
I think it really comes down to, at least locally here, we have different health systems. And so making sure that you pick a doctor who's associated with like the ERs that you actually want to attend, and then making sure that there's a good application. Like the doctor that I uses my chart, which is widely available. There's a lot of good information and that they can put in front of you. And so if they don't have a good app, if they don't have a good like hospital that you're going to be integrated with, then it's going to be a poor experience all around.
And this is a lesson for our viewers that if you ask a telemedicine question, we don't have a ton of questions, we'll even answer that one. The next question.
Gus Libby in Satellite Beach, Florida says, ATEM Mini Pro Extreme ISOs are about 300 more than the ATEM Mini Pro Extreme HDMIs. What are the advantages for a newbie hobbyist filming local musicians starting with an ISO version and therefore an ISO architecture versus HDMI?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So the one thing that I would do, because I would always get the ISO over anything, is you have the ability to do both. And the one cool thing about the ISO is you can, even if you don't use the content, if you just delete it and reuse it and the drive and things like that, is you have a backup. And especially if you're, let's say you're doing a scene and something goes wrong during the scene, you just don't want to show it on the overall video, you can actually take clips from the ISO and superimpose that on top of there. So it's a great backup if you don't use it for that, but then you can go back to your shows and remix it and see how you do it slightly different.
Yeah. As you go, you're going to want to record all those ISOs of all those cameras. You may not want to do it at the beginning, but then you want to do it later and you don't want to rebuy that. So I would definitely save up and get the ISO. Next question.
Dennis Champion Walker in Mansfield, Great Britain. And here behind the scenes often, I'm planning to get a rack-mounted router to manage my 2 internet connections at my new house. I'm considering the Ubiquiti UniFi Dream Machine Pro. What are the panel's thoughts? Would you recommend something else?
John?
I love the Ubiquiti stuff. I've used it in several pro applications. I use it at home. I've done a bunch of churches in it as well. It's a really great solution. It's really affordable for what it brings to the table. I'm not very familiar with using it for double WAN if it has any sort of automatic failover. You may end up, reaching out to something else if you need to do any sort of BGP or anything like that to kind of handle that. But definitely a really great solution all around.
Go ahead, Jason.
I have absolutely used it for failover, and it works quite well. JJ will be the first to say it is not a professional router, and he's right. It is a prosumer router, but I'd say the professional version of Ubiquiti is a beautiful mix of very consumer-friendly and pretty powerful under the hood.
And Jeffrey?
There are two things that I tell people when they're buying a router. First of all, is the 1 gigabit per second connection what you want? And second of all, what's the wireless on there? I know this Ubiquiti does not have Wi-Fi on there, but if you are getting Wi-Fi, always go for 6E now. Don't go for 5 or anything like that. And same thing with the router. If you don't have a 10 gig connection on there and you need it later, then you're basically buying again. So see, if 1 gig is perfect for you and you think in the next 5 years you're not going to change that out, then go for it. But I would seriously look at something that has 2.5 or 10 gig on the network.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from J.J. McKenna in San Rafael, California. While working on pushing forward their sets for office hours, what were the primary considerations of improvements for the panelists?
I'll go ahead, Chris.
I would go for 3 things: personality, framing, and lighting and color contrast. I am partial to this new ice blue look.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was going to say lighting as well. In fact, I've got any changes to my lighting on hold until I can reliably monitor HDR when that feed comes back on and start to make some adjustments based on what I'm seeing, because you can think you're right as much as you want, but until you can actually get feedback on it and see what your picture looks like, it's hard to make those final adjustments.
Yeah, for me, my next version of this is going to have different things I can put behind me. So right now it's kind of set, and it's just hard to change. But I want to be able to have different backgrounds, and I want to make sure I have depth in those backgrounds so that they're out of focus. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I was ready to move into my guest bedroom, but then I got Ziply, and then I couldn't figure out how to get that new gigabyte up and down all the way to the other end of my house. Cabling issues.
Have you heard of Ethernet cables?
What?
They're amazing.
The magic
they
thing
take
was
the internet from here to there.
Where? That's
everywhere.
amazing.
Everywhere.
Shucks. Yes. And well, the fun thing is I asked the Ziply man, hey, could you do that for me? He said, yes, I'd have to charge you, but I could leave you the cable for that. So yes, he took out his box, and yes, I have 300 feet of cable. Now I just have to string it.
Yeah.
So I have heard of it. Thanks, sir.
Jeffrey.
The one thing that I always strive for is portability. How will I be able to tear down the studio as quick as I can set it up? Everything in my studio is on wheels. Everything, even this back wall, it's not a real brick wall, by the way, is removable. I can actually move it to the other side of the house or whatnot. And it really depends on your space. If you've got a small room, a big room, you don't want to get too cluttered. You don't want to get too cluttered with what you're doing, and then find yourself not being able to move things around as easily as you want them to.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I guess, has one. He's addressing me. You mentioned the delay in large venues like arena or stadium as an issue for performers that aren't accustomed to it. Would using in-ear monitors block out the delay? And yes, and in fact, they're mission critical. I can't imagine not doing it. As an announcer, that having to do that announcing in a delay was almost brain locking for me if I heard myself as a bounce back. So I would absolutely require anybody performing to have in-ear monitors. What you want to do is make sure that the track is there so the musicians don't get off time. The track is locked. It is correct tempo, the song is going to go as planned, and then whoever the performer in must have in-ear monitors so that they can get the mix off the house sound system and know where the track is and can perform to in-ears, not perform to the live thing. I can't imagine pulling out an in-ear in a stadium performance circumstance would, I think, be disaster because they're just a terrible acoustic environment.
Next question.
Molly Eisen in Atlanta. My .org is looking to convert a 328 square foot space, formerly used as a green room, into a studio for recorded messages, two-person conversations or interviews, and remote appearance by leadership. Where does one to begin to plan for creating such?
Go ahead, Jason.
Molly, this is a wonderful question, and we do not have time to cover it directly on the panel. I would say after hours is absolutely the way to go. Sign up for after hours, and we will answer all your questions.
Yeah, to get started though, what I would say is, first of all, you want to think about what kind of feel you want. Like, do you want it to feel warm? Do you want it to feel corporate? Do you want it to feel industrial? So you start thinking about what those backgrounds are, and those start driving your colors. The next thing is take a lot of measurements. You need to know exactly what it looks like. The faster you can get it into some kind of place that you can visualize it. SketchUp is a really great. You can download it as a base. It's pretty easy to learn. I mean, if you sit down for a couple hours, you can probably start in SketchUp really fast and be able to just kind of block things out. I'm going to put things over here. I am a strong believer in visualizing what you're going to do first, because I'm still in the midst of planning my studio and replanning it. But I would rather be replanning it in graphics than replanning it in lumber, and metal. So I'm really thinking through a lot of those things, and it's changed dramatically over time. You do have probably enough space to do most of those things, so it should be fine. Height is important. But maybe another question also about just height and width, so that you can let us know like exactly what we're working with. Height, width, depth, all those things. Give us those 3 dimensions and ask that question again, and even during the show, and we'll wax on about it. The best thing to do is ask that question before 6:30 in the morning, and give us more detail. And that's the kind of question that we'll spend 15 minutes talking about at the top of the hour. So that if you give us a little bit more detail and get in a little earlier, you'll probably get a longer response. When we get it at 7:47, we're usually on our way to 8. Next question.
Kevin N. Murphy in Palm Desert says, anyone try out virtual avatars beta in Zoom? And if so, what are your opinions?
Go ahead, Chris.
Really? Just when we thought we licked the virtual background thing, now we have to deal with virtual avatars? Please no. Let's not go down this path.
I mean, the thing is that if you look at this, when you think about avatars, now this isn't the one from Zoom. This is actually the one from Apple. I'm using Clips for this, and here's the problem with this. It's a lot of fun because I can, you have a lot of fun with this, and you get some movement in it, and it's kind of cute. And there's a project that I did recently that I wish I'd used these instead. But I think that the problem really is that you can see that my mouth isn't really moving. It's washed over most of my motion, and I feel like there is this disconnect from our lower brain that wants connection and our upper brain that says this should be a connection, and it just makes us depressed. You start playing with someone who's not you, and I think that's going to be a problem as we really start doing the avatars.
How did Dan Levy get into this show?
Anyway,
Not to mention 10 minutes of every meeting is wasted.
Yeah. So anyway, I think I love the avatars and I have fun with them. I just don't think I'd want to have a 2-hour meeting with them, or a 1 hour, I don't think I'd want to really connect through avatars. That's the challenge that I have. Sky.
Well, I just responding to Chris's 10 minutes of every meeting wasted. And I guess if the interaction of community is built into the meeting, yeah, have some playtime, have some fun fellowship, interactive time. But then, yes, let's get down to business. We need to get stuff done. And I think that's what I'm seeing in the last year and a half of, we just are so grateful that somebody's listening to us or we're able to listen to somebody else. And I think that scheduling of something, working with, by the way, if you ever work with JJ, he will keep you to 20 minutes. Trust me.
Next question. We're going to go a little over. Of course, I got relaxed because we didn't have a lot of questions at the beginning. That's a lesson for our producers. But now we're going to run over just a little bit. Finish this off. Go ahead.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. I was streaming using Switcher Studio on an iPad and 2 iPhones as cameras, switching cameras with a Bluetooth camera remote. Does this change the small control surface? Answer.
I just don't have any experience with Switcher Studio, so I don't know.
It's pretty cool.
Is it cool?
Yeah. I mean, it's against everything. I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. it's against everything that we talk about in terms of reliability and being wired and Ethernet and stuff like that. But if you're like in some weird hotspot and you need to do a multiple camera coverage without laying literally a single cable down, you can stream from the iPad. You can pull all the cameras, iOS cameras, into the switcher wirelessly. All you got to do is throw down a hotspot, and all your cameras are wireless. You can cut between them. I think it even records an EDL. It's crazy. Yeah. It's really, it's super portable, super light footprint. You could walk into a bar and do a 4-camera shoot of a band playing.
Wow. Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. Alex, can you describe your workflow for getting in and out of the Blackmagic 6K DaVinci and into Final Cut Pro 10 for a quick turnaround video?
Yeah, so I don't have a way to show it right now because I was kind of set up for something else. But the I very quickly just throw things into, I throw my RAWs into Resolve, and then I usually do a very quick LUT on them and maybe a little bit of color correction. And then I export them out as usually Apple ProRes HQ if I'm doing a fast turnaround. That's going to give me the bit depth that I need so that I can, make any fine adjustments in Final Cut. But I get them to where I mostly like them. So basically I throw that clip in. There's probably a faster way to do it, but I just throw all the, I'll throw the clips in, I'll export them out as clips, but I'll select them all. I'll convert them from the log file, the raw file, to the 709 or to 2020, depending on what I'm trying to do. So I'm either going to HDR or I'm going to 709. If it's quick turn, it's usually 709. So I do that raw conversion. I have a color corrector in there and I make some fine adjustments to where I like it. I know that I can do more adjustments in Final Cut. It's not like Final Cut can't do color correction. So I can go in and finish that off in Final Cut if I'm doing a fast turn, but I get it in the ballpark, from where that goes. It usually doesn't take me very long. It takes me, I'll bring a bunch of clips in. It'll take me 10 minutes to get all those clips to be processing. I'll go have lunch or coffee or something, come back, and they're all rendered. And then I just throw them into Final Cut, and they're all, and they look good, and it works pretty well for me. Go ahead, Jason.
I used to use a Duo 2 or a 4K capture card because I thought, a lot of the time was lost in this import-export. But since Apple Silicon, I just don't bother anymore. My workflow is very similar to yours.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
It really depends on your definition of a quick turnaround. The 10 minutes it takes you to export those files is sometimes the amount of time I have for an edit. So that's a no-no. But the main thing that was kind of glossed over there is in Resolve, if you throw 20, 30 clips into a timeline, you can go to the, whatever they call it, the exporter room, whatever, and there's a checkbox and it says
export clips.
Export every one of these clips as its own clip, and that's what you've done on the thing. But in my world, what I call quick turnaround, I would just say record that stuff at ProRes. It's just there's not enough time to do all that kind of stuff.
And if you're willing to get a monitor that can record, another Blackmagic monitor that can record, you can have the HDMI output be set to the LUT that you want going into that, and you can record it at the resolution that you need for the fast turn, and you can record internally to the camera at RAW, and then you can. We've done this a lot with other cameras, where we take the video. The video out is a ProRes that we're going to turn right around for the web, but we're recording a much higher resolution version internally that we can then use, and it's frame for frame. So it's not, so that we can always, fix it later or update it to the higher res, but we can also just literally pull an SD card out and cut from there. So that's another way to do it. Even better with an SD reader. If it has the old ones have, these old SD, the little portable SDs, which I still have laying around. The nice thing about those is that it's an SD card and it's just easier to deal with than SSD. SSD readers, they're SD. We'll take ones like that. Well, multi-camera, and we'll record them to those portables. Then you put them into a dock, the Blackmagic dock, and you put the 4 cameras into the dock, and they all show up. Then you just edit right off of them and render it out to another drive, and that's a pretty fast way to get multicam, to cut fast. Let's go ahead to the next question.
Okay, Douglas Carmichael. Jeffrey mentioned that some musicians feel claustrophobic when using in-ear monitors. Would a virtual room technology like Waves NX or Klang help mitigate that feeling?
real fast, 10 seconds. Go ahead, John.
I think those both would introduce too much latency. I think making sure that you're running stereo, helping the musicians understand panning really well is going to make a world of difference, and then room mics being fed into the mix.
You go, Sky.
In-ear monitors are not skull candies, and they may be better headsets, but they also might be something that looks like these, and it's a better experience. And I get the claustrophobia, but get good ears.
Go, Jeffrey.
The answer, I truly believe, is no. This was on the stage question. I wrote in Makana that a lot of stage performers like to take one ear out because you don't hear it as much as you think you do from the crowd kickback, and then they just feel like they're completely enclosed. It doesn't matter how you change it. If you put in ambient mics or anything like that, you still have those things in your ears, and a lot of musicians hate those, and they'll fight tooth and nail, and just to get one in is sometimes difficult.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. I'm beta testing audio software for a major venue and have developed a relationship with them. If I'm building a studio for revenue generating work, would the most favorable course of action be to avoid beta software?
It just depends if it generally, yes. You don't want to explain to a client that you're using test software unless what you're doing. There's times when we use test software, and that's because nothing else like it exists. So we're doing a project that no one's ever done before in a way that no one's ever done before. And there's no other, the client knows there's no other way to do it because it's never been done before. Then beta software is okay. If you're doing it just beta software for the next version, like 5.3 or whatever, that's going to be a hard thing to explain to your client. All right. We are now changing subjects, and we're going to start talking about photogrammetry. So probably we need to describe what photogrammetry is, because I think even with the questions, we can see that there's still some people trying to figure that out. And it's been around for a long time, and it is complicated, but it's becoming more and more of a mainstream thing. Now, photogrammetry actually really started in the 90s. So when I started doing photogrammetry, we did it all by hand. So what that meant was we would use one photo, we'd model towards it, and we'd use another photo and we'd model towards that. And you'd be using it manually, finding cross points to actually work with. And so it was a very, very manual process. In the early 90s, early aughts, that in 2000, 2001, there started to be real photogrammetry. So there was a photogrammetry app called RealViz. Now I can't think of the name of it. I used it all the time. Anyway, RealViz was a company that was bought by Autodesk, and they made the photogrammetry software that we started, Image Modeler. So basically it was making image. It starts with white papers at SIGGRAPH, and then it becomes image models. And what you had to do is identify, given the same points on, basically what you want to do is look at two different photographs. What is the same between these highlight points? And I'll show you a little bit about that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to close this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you things, but it takes time to cook. So basically what we'll do is I'll show you a couple things, and then we'll let them cook a little bit. So let me cut to this. So if we take these two photos, like here's one here and here's one here. Now what we have to do, you'll see that as I keep on turning, I'm looking for objects. So I might say that, just tested that, all right. So I might look at these points, like this point and this point, et cetera. So I might be looking at things are here. And then what I want to do is when I look at this when I look at this one, I'm looking at where are the same points that I was looking at before. So I used to have to identify those by hand. So you were trying to find 8 to 12 points that you could tell it, these are the points in there. And what you try to do is cover as much of the image as possible so that it was able to square out what the focal length had to be for what it's trying to figure out is if this point is 1 here, and if we go back to this, but it's here now, and as you keep on looking at that image, if I keep on telling it this is 0.1, this is 0.2, this is 0.3, when it looks at the difference between those, it's calculating essentially where did those cameras have to be and what focal length did they have to be to be able to see those points. And so the more cameras that you get, and so if you look at this, this was outside of a restaurant at some point, and I think I took these with my iPhone. So if I kind of show you this, you know, what I did is I started going around this object. And what I will say about photogrammetry is the best way to get good at it is to do it all the time. You see something interesting, you just start taking photos. You look odd, but it's okay. So anyway, so you take, I just started taking these photos after a lunch with my iPhone. But what I'm doing is there's a couple things that I'm doing here, and that is I'm taking, you know, more photos. I'm trying to get different angles. Anything that I can't see with those photos is not going to, anything that I can't see from more than 2 or 3, without 2 or 3 cameras seeing it, I'm not going to be able to turn it into, it's not going to turn into geometry. It has to be able to triangulate the position. So you'll see when I show you how this works that it is, that there are parts that I didn't get down on my hands and knees to take a picture outside a restaurant after I was having a business lunch. So that I didn't do that part. But what I'm doing is I'm going around it. I'm trying to get every image that I can find there. So you can see these kind of taking the photos here. And so I grabbed onto this, and this would be a very hard model to build. Like, you know, this is not a trivial model to go, oh, I'm just going to build a 3D model of that. And that's where photogrammetry really becomes useful. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to open up Metashape. Now, the reason I'm using Metashape, there's a lot of different packages. And the reason I'm using Metashape is A, I know how to use it. So B, it is cross-platform. And C, you can play with the demo. If you don't want to save anything out, you can just play with the demo app and it'll build all the models and you can learn how it works and you can get good at it. You can then, there's a 30-day trial. Don't hit that until you already know how to use it. So the key here is if you look at this here on Metashape, you'll see this use the profession. I always download the professional one because it has all the tools in it, but you'll see this continue to use it in demo mode. Just do that. That means you can't save it, but you can play with all the features. When you have figured out how it works, then you can do the 30-day trial and it'll actually let you save things. And then after that, you have to pay a lot of money. And the professional is very expensive. You might go back to the manual one, but while you're testing it, you might as well do it that way. But this works on Linux and Windows and Mac. And there's a lot of great tools that Apple's building. We'll talk about them in future Wednesdays. But I just wanted to show you something that everybody that was watching could use it. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm going to grab this, and you'll be surprised at how easy this actually is. So I'm going to grab all of these photos, and I'm simply going to drag them in. And it's going to not like that. Hold on. Let's see, drag them in. I was playing with it earlier, and I think I changed the setting here. There we go. So they're all in here. There's another way to view that, and I turned it off trying to do something else. Let's see his icons. No, that's not it. Hold on. Yeah, I turned something off there. But anyway, so that you can see that it has 30 cameras. It says, okay, you've got 30 images in here. And what I'm going to do is go up to the workflow. Workflow is where you started. Now you can batch process it, but we're not going to do that right now. So I'm going to say, I want you to align the photos. And when you see these photos here, I've set it to median accuracy because we have a show to do. Now there's a couple things you can do here. You can have key point and tie point limits. These are what they're identifying. When it's set to 0, it means as many as you need, as many as you can find. I want you to go grab those. And then tie points, it's tying between the cameras. It's saying, I'm going to compare these points between the cameras as I was explaining earlier. So how many? So I was talking about 8 or 12, and this is like, well, you can't have more than 4,000 connections between the cameras. So that's going to speed things up a little bit. And just to speed it up a little bit more, we'll set this to 50,000 for now. And this won't be the most accurate or the best model, but it'll give, because you can turn all of these things up. You can say, I want highest, and these are different settings, and they can take a lot longer to make that work. So this is just the introduction. So now I'm going to set it going, and you can see it's starting to detect the points. So it's looking for, and now that detecting points is it looking for things of contrast that it thinks it can identify. Then it starts to select pairs. This is pairing between the cameras, going, this is over here, and this is over here, and this is over here, and it's matching these points up together to put them together, and it will start. It's basically making those calculations on the fly, and now it's estimating where the camera should be, and then I'm going to end up with this. So that didn't take a lot of technical skill. I had to drag and drop and hit something here, and now you can see that this is a 3D model that I can grab onto here. So I can, if I grab onto this ball, I can kind of move it around. So now this is not the model. This is just, these are the reference points that it used to grab onto the cameras. And if I go in here and say that I want to They changed the I haven't used it for a little while because I've been testing other things, and they went and changed my they changed the interface, and so now I'm trying to find everything again. But the anyway, so you have these cameras here. There you go. So they're the cameras, and so it's figured out that that's where I took all the photos. So these points were used to figure out where I was when I took the photos. Now I can also go in here and I'll turn those off, and I can start saying, well, I don't need all those points because these are referenced, and we can get rid of those by just simply we can take this thing and drag and select points here and hit delete. Those are the kind of things that we can kind of build. And when you do it here, it just means that it won't be part of the next level of calculation. By the way, if you're on a Mac, I'm using the delete tool that is in the because it's just grabbing. Well, I think these points are over here. So I can delete these and kind of clean up that model there. So these are all, you can start to clean that up. Now, the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to go into workflow and just go, I want to build a dense cloud. And again, I have options here. You can do very high. We're going to do low because we just want to see it happen. It's still going to do a pretty good job. And if you have time, you will do more of those. You set those things higher. And essentially what happens is you're going to take a lot more, it's just going to take a lot more time. And so a lot of times I'm showing you this one piece at a time so that you can see it. But what I do with it a lot of times is I'm going somewhere. I'm going to go to the office, or I'm going to go home, I'm going to go to sleep, little things like that. And I can set the process up because I can drag those photos in and then just let it just churn through it. And in fact, I can set multiple groups and let it do the batch process to multiple sets of photos, and it'll just do it while I'm sleeping. The computer is just working away and just doing its thing. And so, and what I recommend is if anything I'm doing here looks remotely interesting, you just download this and just start throwing things into it, and just let it churn, and you will slowly figure out how the camera's working. The big thing that happens is that what you're looking for, if you have an object, what you're trying to find is if I have some object, I need to see how it looks. If I have this object, I need to see it from this angle, from this angle, from this angle, not necessarily straight on. Straight on doesn't give you any parallax, and vanishing. It doesn't give you vanishing points, and without the vanishing points, it doesn't really help it that much. You may do that for texture mapping. You may add a camera like that, but the cameras that really help with geometry are the ones that come from different angles. So basically they have vanishing points, and that's going to help them figure out where those cameras are, and then everything else follows through. The key is to, again, for each camera that's looking at it, there has to be overlap, because it's the overlap that tells it. That's how it's triangulating the position. So if you shoot something with a lot of points that are a lot of details that are in one camera but not in the next one, that doesn't help it. Like it needs to have them. It needs to see the same thing from multiple angles. There's a whole philosophical thing about this related to how you should look at the news. But anyway, so you need to see it from different angles of the same thing. And so anyway, so that's what we, and the other thing that makes things like a lot of these photogrammetry things is to be in order. So if you take a picture here and you take a picture here, and these are the next two photos, that kind of makes it harder for the app to figure this out. If you take pictures here, then here, then here, then here, then here, then here, like that, it's actually much easier for it to know that, oh, this is the next photo. These are probably related. These are probably related. And it's a much easier way for it to actually make that calculation. So it does make a difference. Now let's go back. Our steak has finished in the oven. So we have, now this was the tie points. This is just the tie points. And what we've created here is a dense cloud. There's a dense cloud. So this is low quality. So just remember that. So as you look at this is the this is the lower quality version of this model. And I don't know why I'm having something got changed between this version and the last version, and I have just had a heck of a time figuring out why the navigation doesn't work the way it used to. But anyway, so this is the dense cloud here. There we go. So it's not the way you should do it. But anyway, so that's the model. So I built this 3D model. And if I get closer to it, you'll see it's just points. There they are. So those are the points that are there. So they are points, but as I pull away, it just looks like a regular 3D object. So now what I need to do is turn it into geometry. And again, you're going to see this not look nearly as cool because I'm going to do it in the time that we need to do it in the show while I'm talking. And then I'll show you this and then we'll answer some more questions about this. So get your questions rolling in. I know a couple of them are stacking up right now. So now we're going to go back into the workflow and we're going to go down to build mesh. And again, I'm going to say, I could use the tie points. I could use depth math or I could use dense cloud. I'm going to use the dense cloud for this. Arbitrary, or I can make it a height field if I wanted to. And that's I use it because we're taking it with drones or something. We want a height map. And then I can set the face count. So these can't, so it says, if you say hi, I'm going to build 440,000 polygons. If you do medium, we'll do 150,000. So we'll do medium and let it run. And then of course I can decide when the filtering with medium. I don't think it's going to let me do that, but it can kind of figure this stuff out. Now, normally I would get rid of all this errata out here because it'll build a weird part of the model, but we'll just go ahead and let it run. I got to explain it. So now it's generating the mesh. And again, this will probably happen pretty quickly because I set it to a pretty low resolution, relative to what it's capable of. So this will happen pretty quickly. And again, remember that you can batch all this. So you can just say, this is like step by step. A lot of these might take 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours to do, but you can just say, create the points, then create a dense mesh, then create this, then create the textures. So those are all things that can happen without that. And so anyway, so you'll see this now. If I go and look at the 3D model, low quality, this is the 3D model that I created from a couple photos. Now I can make it much higher resolution if I can make it a much higher resolution if I turned up all those dials and just waited longer. But even with this, if you just threw something in for reference, so again, to think about something like, I want to pre-visualize something. I just want something to throw in there that is roughly the same as my object. That's the kind of thing that this can do very well. Now let me now show you. Let's see. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this at scale. So this is kind of a cute little version of it, and I will let's see if I can find this really quick. I had it up and then I moved it. Let's see. And I've shown this, I think, before, but I think it's more applicable now. So we'll go through it again. This is a little thing I did. I happened to be in Cambodia. And so this is a temple. This is the Bayon temple. And you can see these are 3D models done exactly what I just showed you. So this is all, even the ropes there are 3D. Now this is spending a little bit more time on the calculation and a couple more photos. I'll show them to you in a second. This is 3D. You can see if you look right over here, if you look closely, you'll see the points actually there. So this is just the points. But the depth, all this depth is actually 3D. So that's a 3D model of that wall. And let me get back to here. Sorry. And it was, I think, a pool or something like that. That's the photos. So to do this is these are all the photos I took to get what you're seeing there. So you can see there's all those little photos that are there from what I did there that you can actually see the ball from Metashape on that capture. Here is kind of a higher view of it, of what I built there. And so these are, and this is just, this is just like my pastime. So this was like, it's what I do when I go to somewhere that I think will be good, have good 3D models. So anyway, so that is that's kind of to show you what can be done and how much detail can be, produced. And of course, as we start to think about AR, you can start to think about how interesting it would be to be able to reproduce places like that and walk through them and put them together. So, this is a pretty powerful tool, and this is without any LiDAR. This is without any, anything else. And one of the things that does happen is that, you're only limited by the resolution. And this was not done. This was no specialty camera. This was me walking around with an old 5D Mark II. That's old 5D Mark II and a 24-70. The one thing that I did do is I locked it. The 24 to 70 has a little feature that no one uses that lets you lock to 24. So you can push this little button and it'll lock it, because the one thing you do not want to do is change your focal length. So you take everything with a relatively wide angle, but not a fisheye, but a wide angle, and then you do not want it to, you don't want to change your focal length. And that's what makes the iPhone actually, well, it used to make it great. It's a little bit more complicated now because of the fact that it wants to jump lenses. So, but what's great about, in general, iPhones, when you can keep them on the same, when they don't flip, is that they will always be exactly the same, for that. So anyway, so that's a kind of a quick introduction to photogrammetry. I'm sure we have a couple questions that are lining up, and we can kind of talk to those. So, and hopefully maybe show you some other things. Let's go to go ahead, Chris.
So Alex, is it possible to get one of these models? Is there a workflow to turn it into a USDZ?
Yeah, there is. It's so the way to do that, the way I do it to get it into USDZ is that the way these were built into USDZ, and I don't have maybe I do. Hold on. So the way I did it is I used, I have done it with with one of these models. And what I did is I took it out of Metashape and saved it as an OBJ with the textures. I then take that into Reality Converter, which is something that Apple makes for free. Well, if you're on a developer plan, it's free. So you have to pay the $100 to be a developer for Apple, but then you get Reality Converter. I can then take that into Reality Creator, which is another free app that developers have access to. And then from Reality Creator, I can just export it out as a USDZ that I can, to my phone, like literally push it from Reality Creator to your phone directly. And so now it's in your phone, and you can play with it there. So that's one way to do it. Another way, the more complex way to do it, is to export it out as a OBJ, take it into, still take it into, I took it into ZBrush a lot of times to clean things up a little bit, or to decimate. The decimation tools in ZBrush, and what decimation means is it's gonna look at the geometry and say, there's a flat surface there. You don't need all the polygons for that. So we're gonna get rid of some of them. We're just gonna blend them together where they don't make much changes, but we're going to keep all the polygons where the edges are. So where there's corners and when there's changes, we're going to keep those. We're going to keep that geometry, but we're going to get rid of the geometry that doesn't change very much. And so what decimation does is you say, I know this is 350 million polygons. Like this project that I just showed you. Oops, I hit the wrong button. This one here is about 300. Left on its own is about 350 million polygons, and that's too much for a phone. So the phone maxes out at about, the iPhone maxes out at about 2 million to 3 million polygons, where it starts to, and when I say maxes out, it can show it higher than that. It can go up to about 15 or 20 million polygons, but the problem is that number one is it doesn't natively allow you to do that with the phone. You can't text someone anything more than 50 megs for USDZ. So you have to keep it under 50 megabytes. And then it doesn't really, most phones, 2 or 3 million polygons is where you're getting that high frame rate where it really feels like it's part of the scene. Anything over that, it starts to get a little clunky. So you take it into ZBrush and then you decimate the polygons. What ZBrush does really well is it decimates those, but then it also can put the texture maps back on. The UV maps still work. And so you can pull those UV maps back on. Then you can export it out. You export it out as an OBJ. I don't know if ZBrush has added USDZ yet for its export, but I still do it in OBJ and then go through Reality Converter or through Substance. Substance is a great place to convert that to USDZ. So anyway, so that's the pathway. You can absolutely do it into get it to USDZ. That's all I was doing this for. This was shot 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. But I've been kind of playing with the USDZ stuff since then. Or a little before that. And so I think that there's, again, hopefully this session, we can do an after-hour session where we all do it together and we all talk about it and everything else. What I hope to do on this Wednesday is at least get people excited about it. Like, it's a pretty cool thing. It's not very hard to do. and it's the future. There's going to be a lot of things that people are going to want to do that. And Chris, we can hear you with your Rubik's Cube. Anyway, so but anyway, so it's a pretty cool little project there. So let's go open up to the questions.
Our first one comes from Mike Emmett in Melbourne, Australia. Excuse me. I need LiDAR-equipped cameras to shoot for photogrammetry? The iPhone camera is good, but my studio gear is, well, better.
No, in fact, again, what I just showed you was shot. The first thing that I showed you as the quick example, that was shot on my iPhone. The next model was a Canon 5D Mark II. One thing that I just haven't had time to test that I want to get is the newer A7R4 that does 60 megapixels, because the pixels make a big difference. So if you have a lot of pixels to work with, then it's a great thing to do. The only challenge with nicer cameras is depth of field. So if you have short depth of field, which the larger sensors are going to give you, it makes it very hard for photogrammetry to work. so it gets, because it needs to see those pixels that can't be soft. So there's things that are kind of a challenge with photogrammetry that you have to be careful of is focus. As the focus changes, the focal length changes a little bit, and you can still focus a little bit, but you cannot change the focal length. Depth of field is a real issue. So, and what we have found over time is that it's better to turn your ISO up than to open up your aperture. So you want your aperture to be as closed as you can get away with it, and then you're better. Now, obviously, as soon as you start getting too grainy, it's problematic. But as you can get up, it depends on the camera, but 400, 800, maybe even 1600 ISO, and on a high quality camera, you can get away with that, and you're going to get a better geometry because you're able to keep your focal length. Keep your f-stop to a higher number, smaller aperture, so that you want to get as much depth of field as you can get. So that you have hard points for everything that's out there. So it's kind of that's the only problem with the higher quality cameras, is that you have to be careful of that. That's where sensor size doesn't necessarily help you. Next question.
Comes from Mike Emmett, and to what you were just talking about. He says, I'm a photographer who uses depth of field, props, and lighting to create mood and emotion when I shoot food and cooking stills and video. How can I take these ideas to photogrammetry and evoke emotion in 3D images?
So what you're looking for is physical-based rendering, which is, that's something, if you play with something like Cinema 4D or something like that, you can create big lights, and you're basically creating global illumination with physical-based rendering, and it will recalculate that. And the great thing about it is if you get really high-quality 3D models, you can now reproduce what you shot and relight it. And now the key to relighting is really lots of diffuse lighting. So there's more complex ways to generate that with colored lights, but that's a whole nother hour that we're not going to get into right now. So for right now, what you need is big diffuse lighting that is coming from all directions. And so you're not trying to capture the look that you're trying to look for. You're trying to capture the general quality of all the pieces without specular, or what I mean by specular is the light reflections, the shininess. So you want to get rid of as much of that as you can and just get a big opening. Now you can recreate all of those surfaces again inside your 3D application. So it could be a lot of work to get it set up, but the cool thing is once you have it set up, you can keep changing it. You can keep on changing that lighting and moving it around and changing your depth of field, animating your depth of field. All of those things are possible. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just wondering if it would make sense to do all of your mood lighting and get your pretty pictures first, and then throw a bunch of softbox flash on there and do one frame for photogrammetry that had everything in sharp detail.
You can, except that doesn't really, you can use the photos for whatever you want. So I would shoot them artistically, but to get the photogrammetry and to get the colors you're looking for and everything else, and to be able to be responsive to the light that's around it. Because a lot of what's happening now is like what Apple's doing is using the cameras on your phone to figure out what the lighting is around it. And so it's reapplying that. So any lights that you already have, then mix with that, and it doesn't work very well. So what you want is general color of the surfaces, all of those things in the geometry. And then, but if you get something that is the kind of moody, this angle or this angle with any kind of contrast, it's not going to look correct when you put it on your desk, because its lighting isn't the same as it was when you shot it. So you want a general lighting, and then let the system relight it based on what it's looking at.
I'm curious if you shot a 40 or 70 photos using the object is fixed using one set of lighting, and then you shot 40 to 70. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be the same photos unless you had a motion control rig or something like that. But 40 or 70 shots, would they map equivalently to the 3D object? Just two different passes?
Well, you don't. But the thing is, you don't want to try to figure it out in the camera. In this case, when you're shooting photogrammetry, you'll figure that out in your 3D package, because you can redo the lighting and redo the depth of field in the 3D package. You don't want to do it in the camera at that point. You might want to take the photos if you want to use them for something. I might take the plate, put it somewhere, build an RD photo, but then I'm going to take it over to a rig, and I'm going to take those pictures in a more plain experience. And we will. This is an introduction to it, and it's cross-platform. There'll be another second hour somewhere in the future that we'll do that is that uses the Apple stuff, that is using the LiDAR and the cameras and so on and so forth. Next question.
Fair enough. Kevin N. Murphy in Palm Desert, California says, what are some strategies and required equipment for shooting larger physical spaces and combining them after reconstruction?
So as you saw what I showed there, you can it's a pretty large space. It's not a massive space, but it's a pretty large space. You can also do it from drones. So we built these there's a company that we'll probably bring on to show as we start talking about photogrammetry called Drone Deploy. And Drone Deploy allows you to actually, you can just carve out an area. I want to digitize this whole area on basically Google Maps. Hit go, and it will talk to your DJI and just send it up. It takes off and it just starts doing a grid. It'll just start shooting a grid back and forth. The camera will just do its thing. And it'll come back with all those photos, and you can drag all those photos and upload them to Drone Deploy. It'll give you back a 3D model. Here's your 3D model of that. And that's 1.5 square miles is the largest one I've done. So, and it's not as high res as a LiDAR or everything else. So you're really limited only to how powerful your camera is. The quality of the camera is useful. I mean, so higher resolution of the camera, better quality pixels, all those things, how grainy it is, those are going to make a big difference. But you can definitely shoot it. What I will say is that there's certain things that are harder to shoot than others. Shooting inside out is harder. So when you try to do photogrammetry from the inside of a room, the bigger the room is, the actual easier it is to do, to get that data. But you want to make sure that you're getting lots of overlap, and you go from the very out. What I do is I tend to go all the way around the outside, and then I will go in the inside and like in the very center and shoot those. And so that I'm mixing and matching those two groups. But if you only have the ones from the very inside, the temptation you're going to have is to just shoot around, like be in the middle of a room and shoot it has a hard time figuring that out. But if you go around the outside edge, and what I do is I tend to go around the outside edge, looking at the center from the cameras, and or sometimes having three images like that from one place, and then going to the next one doing three, where the center of the room is on one side, middle, and the other side, and I go all the way around, and that will help me build that geometry. So it's paying attention to the pixels and knowing that you're going to get a lower resolution because the pixels can only go so far. Go ahead, Chris.
Something you just said took me, I lost where I was.
Okay. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico says, what would be the features for a simple photogrammetry app or system that uses a multi-camera setup?
So the biggest problem, what you want if you're going to do a multi-camera setup, and that does work, especially for objects. It doesn't really work for scenes because you're walking around the scene. But if you're talking about objects, multi-camera can be really efficient. So we've had rigs that are down below the object, at the object, above, and usually the most I've done is 5 cameras in basically a semi-curve. And then what we do is we put it on a Lazy Susan, and we put some calibration markers on it so that it knows where, the calibration markers tell it where it is. And then we've had ones that are motorized. And so what they do is they turn, it's like a big turntable, and you can make them as big as a car. It'll just turn, snap, turn, snap, turn, snap, turn, snap. And it'll do it. Now, the problem with that is that the lighting changes. If you don't get it really even, you're moving the object. So there are rigs out there that are 160 cameras that are all on there at one time, and then boom, you take a picture, and that photogrammetry, it builds the geometry from it. In fact, I'll try to find that while we're talking. But anyway, so there are definitely ways to, like, this is how photogrammetry is how the NBA, the 2K and NBA game is done. They literally pull a van up outside of a stadium. The players come in and they get 5 minutes with every player, and the player puts their hands out like this and then does all these different things with their face so that they capture all the different movements. And they take 160 photos at one time, just like boom, boom, boom. And they're just regular old still cameras, but they're feeding those back into a central system that then uses Metashape, what I just showed you, to build those objects. And then they have to clean them up in ZBrush, and then they deliver them. Next question.
Kevin N. Murphy in Palm Desert, California is up next. He says, any recommended remote trigger for iOS device cameras when using a pole to get images from higher up, something longer than a selfie stick?
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
Not that it's a recommendation, but I just did discover this thing on Amazon called ULANZI, and it has a little grip that you put on your iPhone, also with a 1/4-20 at the bottom, and it has a remote clicker. So I'm not recommending it, but it was something that I just observed, and I'll put it in the Makana.
Yeah, Bill.
There's also a camera app called Remote that will allow any one iOS device to trigger another iOS device. It's a simple app, and so there's a way to do that.
I think what I'm missing right now is someone building an app that will let 4 or 5 cameras talk to each other and then talk to the turntable so that it just turns, fires, turns, fires, turns, fires. That's something that you could use for models. That's all I'm saying.
You sound like you don't want to work, Alex.
I don't. Well, what you have to think about when you're building these models is, how do I do 100 a day? Like, how do I, capture 100 a day? Not how do I do 1 in 3 hours? There's not, you want to figure out, how do I take an entire inventory and turn it into 3D models? And so we're always trying to figure out how to scrape that all down. Next question.
Michael Andreas in Olathe, Kansas says, to what extent do the following factors make photogrammetry difficult? 1, lens distortions. 2, changing and or hard shadows, such as your sculpture on the patio.
Very much. So lens distortion is a big part of it. It's going to calculate those a lot. With most of these programs, you can actually import the lens distortion because they know what that is if you set it at a certain rate. A lot of people use fixed lenses for this. Now, I have a tendency to use that 24-70 zoom because sometimes I want to make an adjustment in the fly. But fixed lenses work better because you really can't change them. But a lot of times you can load in and say, I've got a Canon 35mm lens, and it knows what that distortion should be in that Canon camera. And so that helps it a fair bit. I usually let it just go ahead and figure it out, and I've been pretty successful. It'll figure out what the distortion is in the distortion map, as well as the position of the camera and focal length. As long as the focal length doesn't change. Focal length changing is a big deal. It's like, do not cross the beams. Hard shadows make it hard because the contrast, so a lot of things are in shadow. It can't see those points as well. You can load raw files into a photogrammetry, and so you'll get more of that data. It takes a lot longer for it to process. So, but it is but hard shadows and hard bright lights and things that flatten out. If it flattens out, there's no points. Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is up next with, is it possible to create a 3D model from a still frame exports of a video shot at a high frame rate on a 12K camera?
It is possible, and we have done photogrammetry from video. So it's definitely possible to do it. The real challenge is, how much is it moving? So if it moves too much, you're going to get motion blur, and motion blur means it doesn't know where those points are. So it can grab that, but if there's too much motion blur, high frame rate is what you pointed out there, and that definitely lowers that motion blur. But we've definitely done geometry that way. And so and if you turn it up all the way up, like 120 frames a second, there's very little motion blur, and so you can walk through something, and there are programs that will generate the geometry. You can literally just walk down a hallway with video, and even Cinema 4D will generate a bunch of geometry. Is it going to be as high resolution as what we just did? No. But will it be something you could track things to the walls and everything else? Yeah, absolutely. So it can do a lot of those things. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is back. How much do lighting variations affect the end result, and how hard is it to color correct these models?
It's very hard to color correct the models because they're just doing texture maps to the geometry. So it is a big challenge. So you want to try to minimize lighting changes. The days that I run out, that I shoot most of my stuff, is I look outside and it's cloudy. When it's cloudy, I want to shoot everything. That's usually where I shoot my texture maps. It's also where I shoot geometry outside, because it's a big diffuse layer makes it much easier for you to shoot. But the only problem you get into is when the clouds change. So what I like is it to be really cloudy, not like broken clouds, because then things go highlights and then they're in shadow and then they're et cetera. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. Can you 3D print from photogrammetry data?
Absolutely. So once you've done that 3D print, the big challenge with it is making sure that it's what we call airtight, which means that you have to make sure that it's closed all the way around. But you saw even with the simple one I built, Metashape just built it airtight. It was like, oh, I'm just going to close up the areas that I don't know about. I'm just going to guess. So you can have it and you can usually take it in, and even things that are not fully airtight, good printing software will just fill it in for you. So you can absolutely take a bunch of pictures, turn it into a 3D model, and print it. The main thing you have to figure out is scale. Now you can scale something down. The cool thing about having LiDAR mixed with photogrammetry is that it's going to give you a very accurate scale. Next question.
Eric in DC is up next. He says, are model files rare enough to be marketable depending on the subject? And he's thinking about science lab equipment. Interesting.
Yeah, what you would probably do with science lab equipment is you would still build it. What you can do, what a lot of us have done for a long time, is you take scans or you take photogrammetry and then you use it as a template you're basically tracing or snapping to the surface, and then you rebuild the equipment by hand, as a 3D model. And so that's the way to reverse it from the photographs, because what's happening is it's throwing a lot of polygons around your bolts and around long, smooth areas, and those can be better represented with just clean geometry. So a lot of times we will use this, and we've been doing this. I mean, I've done it for almost 30 years where we took Cyberware used to be the company we used. We'd scan something and then I would snap to those points and then rebuild it from the ground up. So you absolutely can. But if I was doing a medical equipment with hard surfaces, you want a hard surface model that. The photogrammetry really, you can get all the measurements and the sizes and stuff like that from photogrammetry or LiDAR. Or some kind of laser scan, but then you'd want to rebuild geometry so that it's more efficient. It'll be cleaner where it needs to be, and it'll have the edges just where it needs to be, and it'll be more precise. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. When you take the pictures to import into Metashape, do you use any tool to stabilize your camera to get an accurate point cloud?
My hand, I stop. You get good at just going freeze to. And then freeze, and I do let myself settle as I take the pictures, because that is a big problem. Is people get into a rush because there's all these photos they have to take, and they're moving while they're taking the picture. I don't have to stabilize them, like they don't have to be stabilized to each other. You just have to make sure. The general rule of thumb is that your shutter speed should be twice your focal length. Your aperture. Oh, I can't know. Your shutter speed should be twice the focal length. So if you have a 35 millimeter lens, you should be at 1/7. You can't really do 1/70th, but 1/80th or 1/100th of it. If you go under 1/60th for let's say a 30 millimeter lens or whatever, you're in the area where you're probably going to get some motion blur. And so you want to be careful of doing that. I keep the rule of thumb. I can get down to 1:1 if I haven't had too much coffee and shoot without motion blur, but I generally follow the 2:1 rule of where my shutter and because you're using wide angle cameras, you're doing a 24 millimeter or 18 millimeter. That shutter speed can go pretty low, but I like to keep the shutter speed I like to keep relatively high, but the big thing you want to do is close that aperture down. You want to be at 11 or 16, something like that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael right back with, which iPhone model would you recommend for learning photogrammetry and LiDAR capture? Would the iPhone 13 Pro Max be best?
I'll be honest. I actually think that the 11 is best because the 12 and the 13 have this thing where they want to jump lenses, and it drives me a little crazy. So I don't think they are the best. The advantage that they have is LiDAR. So if you're just doing photogrammetry, an older iPhone works pretty well. If you're going to mix the LiDAR and use Apple's tools, not Metashape's tools, then you want to have the 12 or the 13 that have LiDAR built in. So you went the Pro. I don't think the Max makes any difference, but you do want the LiDAR. And the reason for that is that, again, LiDAR is what we call structured light. And you want that structured light that tells you exactly where those points are, but photogrammetry gives you detail. So detail and color is what you get out of the photogrammetry. And the two of them mixed together is a lethal combination. It's really, really great. Next question.
On that point, Kevin Murphy in Palm Desert comes back with, where does the current iOS LiDAR really shine for photogrammetry?
It's really using the Apple tools. So Apple's built some libraries that are a variety of, and the way to test them is you can actually, if you're a developer, you can use them in the command line, and you can dump a bunch of photos in, they'll dump a model out for you. That's the raw version of Apple's tools. There are companies called, I think one's called PhotoCatch. I'm a little annoyed by their business model, so I haven't used them very much. so we may still show them if I can't find something better. But I find that the idea that they're going to charge me per model, I find offensive. So I haven't really I haven't dug into them as much. So that's the only problem that I have right now with it. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is up next. He says, would a camera like the Panasonic S1R with a full-frame 47.3 megapixel MOS sensor be better or worse than a Micro Four Thirds?
At the same megapixel, there's a couple different things you have to deal with there. In general, I would say that you're going to get higher quality pixels with the full frame sensor. The problem is the full frame sensor will go to shorter depth of field faster, because it's going to be larger there. That's usually what we want, not necessarily in this case. So at the same megapixel on a well-lit model, I'd be tempted to actually say that the Micro Four Thirds would give you a better solution, because the smaller chip, the smaller sensor is going to give you a greater depth of field, which in this case is something you want. But it has to be well lit, because of course the 4/3 inch sensor will not generally handle low light or lower light as well. And so, and how that affects you is that you may want to turn your ISO up to lower your aperture. So these are all the things that you have to kind of think through, and there's no clean answer for that, but it would depend on the camera probably. Next question.
Comes from Kent King in Charlotte, North Carolina. He says, what would be the best camera, 5K or less, and lens to use?
The one that we've used, I don't know exactly what the prices are on these, but the last one that we've used that we've been really happy with is the Canon or the Sony what is it? A7R3. I haven't had a chance to use the R4. And then using some kind of 24 or 24 to 70 or 35 millimeter lens, and those have been very successful for us as far as getting a lot of data from that. And again, if you can mix that data with LiDAR, it becomes really, really good. But that's the Sonys have been really successful for us in that area, just because of the resolution and the image quality is very high. Next question.
Next one from Marius in Johannesburg, South Africa. Are there any apps to add interactivity to USDZ? I'm thinking something like the old QTVR Studio, building scenes and so forth.
I think that they're all in the works. Apple's dropping lots and lots of APIs and libraries for people to do a lot of this stuff. And so most of the movement here right now is on the Mac platform and on the iOS platform. But I think that those are the places to look at. The idea behind Reality Creator is to make the interaction with the 3D models easy for programmers. So you can do a lot of the work really quickly in Reality Creator, creating the behaviors and movements and so on and so forth without having to write code for that, and then access that through the API or access it through your app. Next question.
Stefan Fischer here in the panel from Würzburg, Germany says, where can I use these photos? Where do they make the biggest difference? Is it websites, something else?
Well, what you want is the future that's coming is AR with the phones. And I was talking about it a little bit in the first hour, but being able to send products to people, send things you want to train them on how to do. Eventually we're going to be able to, because again, when you start thinking about apps as well, think about the idea of what if I had my Mix Pre 3 and I had a 3D model of it, and I could sit there and move all the dials, and we built the behavior of the Mix Pre 3 into it as an app. And now I could sit there and learn how to use a Mix Pre 3 and have little things appear above it and around it and everything else. Okay, could do this. We could have the virtual Mickey, like a little Mickey could be saying, now do this. Now turn this. Now move this over here. So there's a lot of things that you could do in that area. And so what's going to happen is, and again, a lot of companies are spending a lot of money on this right now. Amazon is building hundreds and hundreds or have built thousands of models. They in their warehouses in China, they have people taking pictures of couches, and then people are using a mixture of photogrammetry and then remodeling them in to make them efficient. So all of the stuff's happening all the time, and we just don't see it because they're all waiting for for the next thing. so you're starting to see it bubble to the surface, but it's a pretty exciting model right now. And again, what we want to do is have people get ahead of it, because there's going to be, like, for instance, if I wanted to show this mug, for some reason this is a special mug that I want to show in a presentation. We're getting to the point where I could take a picture of this really quickly, and I could throw it in as USDZ and eventually be able to throw it into Keynote, rotate it to where I want it, and now I have it in my presentation. And I can literally just move that stuff in to my presentation or to my pages, eventually to pages. And imagine being able to do that and being able to actually send someone a document where you're explaining something and they can rotate it around, or they could tap on it and it pops out in front of them. So if you're trying to sell something or you're trying to teach something, and then when you start thinking about LiDAR in the phone, you want to remember that it can track things and it can identify things based on their shape. So if you're trying to put together a Kia, you could literally hold it up to the phone and it says, okay, now put it right there, and put this here and put this over here. We don't have to swear at a Kia anymore. So I mean, we might still do it just for fun, but we don't have to do it, without fun. But but all those things on how to build something, how to put it together, how to do all those things, it's going to revolutionize how we learn to put things together. And the companies that are on the front edge are going to start doing it. And it'll be one of those things that'll be really cool for the first 5 years. And within 10 years, it'll be like people won't buy your products because you don't have a 3D model, a 3D animation that shows how to put them together. Like it will get to that within the next decade. So that's why it's important to stay ahead of it now. Stefan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Next question.
Comes from Mike Beardmore in Reading in the UK, and he says, does iPhone video include LiDAR data or just photos?
The photos can have the depth that it calculated inserted in the HEIC. So the original photo that it takes carries the depth information with it. Yeah, so you definitely have it there. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, could you use a micro drone like the DJI Mini 2 for photogrammetry? The advantage of the Mini is that it doesn't need to be registered.
You could do it for some photogrammetry. I mean, any camera can produce photogrammetry. It's just the quality of the photogrammetry. So the cheaper lens, the smaller sensor, all of those things will have a little bit of harder time of getting the quality of the geometry, but you could absolutely do it. Next question.
Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, BC says companies like Matterport advertise ease of use in creating real estate walkthroughs. Is this the photogrammetry killer app?
Matterport's pretty cool. I've owned a Matterport. It is to build walkthroughs for real estate. It's pretty awesome. Like it is, like you just sit there and build, and it just builds out this little piece, and it does that. The geometry that it builds is pretty low quality. So the 3D geometry that you get with a Matterport, I wouldn't use for anything other than what it uses it for, which is like a little bit of being able to move around a little bit, but it's blocky and not very high quality. It's usually basically using a Kinect camera, or 3 of them to build the geometry with imagery. So I think that the Matterport, we used it a lot when I used to do things on site. We'd send the Matterport out and just have walkthroughs so that we could really understand what we were going to do in the set. And it was really powerful for that. It's very limited in the space that it can work. So its LiDAR is very, short range. And so it works really, really well in smaller environments and not very well in larger environments. And the photogrammetry scales to anything. You can take, pictures of, miles of data, at a low resolution, but you're not limited to how far the laser goes out from that piece. And so, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it's stunning for real estate. I work for a contract for a company in Austin that does a lot of Matterport. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the photos look nice. It's just, if you're trying to create geometry, the geometry is like, if you say, look at the geometry, it just looks like gobbledygook. Next question.
Jeff Dooley in Chicago's up next, and he said, what would be a good background, something that would not get captured?
A lot of people use White, actually, or black. The problem really is you don't want to color it. So there are people who use green and blue. The problem is that colors the object itself. So you can key it out easily, but then you're coloring the object with bounce light. So, and so generally that's where the LiDAR comes in from the phone, because it can actually do a pretty good job of, the LiDAR knows that, oh, that's the background, ignore that. Because it knows the depth of where it's, so it can tell before it starts doing the photogrammetry, it knows what is the model and what's not the model. So that's where the phone becomes really powerful in that area. But most people that I've seen, and I usually just shoot objects in place where they are, because of what I'm doing. But when we built these rigs to shoot them for QuickTime VR and everything else, we usually use white. Next question.
Kevin Murphy in Palm Desert's up next. Recommended applications for cleaning up captures using Fresh Mixer currently.
ZBrush. ZBrush is the best. Like there's lots of other things that you can use for it, but it's not the cheapest solution, and there's like a subscription model or whatever, but it's the best. So to do that's what everybody that I know uses to clean up their models. Next question.
Rick Emery in Atlanta, Georgia up next. And Rick asks, can 3D models be created from using burst mode photos while moving around the object?
You could. I find that it's easier to get high quality models by being purposeful, being intentional about what I'm taking pictures of. And I don't want an enormous number of models. I mean, every time you add all those, you're adding more points and potentially more errata. So if the cameras have a little bit of motion blur because you are moving around in burst mode and everything else, you're actually creating more trouble. There's more for it to calculate for no reason. So usually when I'm taking the photos, I'm taking them at a distance that I've decided, and I'm framing it in a way that I've decided. And I find that it doesn't take me very long to take those photos. And I think that burst mode would save me maybe a minute, but cost me an hour on the other end in the processing, because I'd end up with more junk and I'd have to deal with more photos. And I think that you'll find that when you start shooting them, being intentional about how you shoot them will create a better model and save you a lot of time and geometry and everything else. Next question.
Next comes from our friend Nick Justison in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who's often here as our Unreal guru. He says, sorry, couldn't join today. Note 1, could Alex comment on the advantages that could come from using a cross-polarized ring flash for photogrammetry, which is one of his current workflows?
I'm going to let you explain that, Nick, next Wednesday or something. So we'll have someone ask it. You know that workflow better than I do. And so we'll wait for you to come back in. Next question.
Next one comes from Marius in Johannesburg. Would a rotating surface be a good option to capture small objects? Will a static background be a problem?
Yeah. So what you need to do with that, you need to have a target or a series of targets on the turntable itself, because that'll allow it to orientate itself. It'll know where it's at. It knows, oh, this isn't the same photo. This isn't the same place. I'm actually turning around it. So if you have those, it works well. Now, again, I think a lot of the Apple stuff will do it automatically for you. It'll just figure it out. But what we've used in the past, we've usually used some kind of target, and I don't have an example of that to show you, but we can talk about. Again, this is the intro to photogrammetry, but we can set up in the future, we'll talk about making models. I'm probably gonna talk about photogrammetry at least once a month, like on Wednesdays. So, so we'll I want to take you through the Apple stuff. We'll talk about objects. We'll talk about, again, we'll get drone deploy on, we'll get a bunch of things on there. So there's a lot we can cover over time. Next question.
Nick Justison's back, and he says, note 2, could Alex comment on the advantages that can be gained for shiny object photogrammetry by using a dulling 3D scanning spray that evaporates into the air later? And he has a link of some sort, AES-UB 3D scanning spray.
Yeah, so the advantage of that is really that, I mean, as Nick points out, is that what really causes problems is things changing on the surface. So if you're moving around the surface or you're moving the object around, the challenge you get into is those specular highlights. A specular highlight is the angle of incident equals the angle of reflection. So instead of a diffuse highlight is just all the stuff coming in and it's just bouncing everywhere, but what we think of as reflections, like a mirror-like reflection, is this. A specular reflection is typically how we define, I have a light over here. And so what happens is as I move, that light moves of where on the surface it's being seen, especially in things like curved surfaces. And the problem you get into with that is that now it's moving and it's telling it, well, I don't know what that point is, because that point was here on this photo and now it's over here. And so as it changes those, it becomes problematic. And so what we do is we use dulling sprays to get rid of that specular reflection. And the one that he's laying out here will tend to not do any damage to the surface. Obviously, you got to be careful if you're using historical objects, but for a lot of objects, it can help get rid of that shininess momentarily while you do it. We've used a lot of things. We've used dust, just make it really, really dusty. We've also painted them. Like if it's an object that doesn't matter, we'll just spray paint it to get that out there as well. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with NASA mentions structured light scanning as a tool used on the Space Launch System rocket program. How does that relate to photogrammetry? And there's a link there.
So typically photogrammetry is considered unstructured light, while LiDAR is considered structured light. So it's probably when they're talking about structured light scanning, they mean that they're not using photogrammetry, most likely. They're using some version of a laser scanner that knows where the points are in relationship to the camera. Next question.
Stefan Fischer, Würzburg, Germany, here in the panel. Can a film camera be used to create the material when using the single frames after shooting?
Yeah, it automatically does that. So most of these will automatically grab use the color that it got from the camera and build a texture map. And the key is, the really tricky part is that if you have a surface and I've got one photo over here and one photo over here, what it's going to do is it's going to look at when it's building every pixel, or sometimes it's not every pixel, but it's looking at that pixel has, let's say, a normal, and a normal is usually the vector that's perpendicular to the pixel. So to that surface, if you have a surface here, think about these points here, and there's a pixel here, and that normal is sticking straight out from that pixel. It's also how we do things like bump maps and so on and so forth. And so anyway, so that in normal maps, and so this is the normal of that, and what we call the normal of that pixel, and it's going to look at this photograph and say, this is my angle to that vector, and this is my angle to this camera. At some point, this vector is closer to this camera than that camera. It means it's a better angle, to get the color. And so then it's going to grab this. It's going to grab the pixel that it knows is coming from here. And so now how it blends it and how it makes that look good that's some of the secret sauce that a lot of these photogrammetry things. But it does a very good job. If you look at, if we cut back to this, and if I go over here again, no, that's my wedding. A long time ago. I hit the wrong button here. There we go. But all of these textures here are grabbed that way. It's lots of photographs. I didn't have to reapply that stuff. It's making the calculation of what those colors should be, based automatically from those photographs. So, so there you go. Hopefully that was a good introduction to photogrammetry to at least get people thinking about it. We'll probably do some after hours stuff as well, but we'll do that. But about once a month, we'll talk about it. My recommendation is to go download it, watch this video again, and I'll try to make a more compact version of how to do that. But I would, it's really worth playing with. It's just a lot of fun because it doesn't take much work. You take a bunch of photos, you're just hanging out, you're bored, you're waiting for somebody. I'll take a bunch of photos, and then I go back and I throw them into the pot, and I go away and do something else and come back and it's done. And there's always you think of all the downtime in your computer that it could be doing photogrammetry. So anyway, so it's the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. It's because you'll see, oh, that didn't work, or it said I can't use these 3 photos, and look at the photos and just practice. It literally is just do it over and over again, and you'll get somewhere. Anyway, so hopefully that's enjoyable for everybody. And it's the goal. What I hope people leave with is really that it's just not that hard, to get started. It can get hard to do it well, but it's to get started, and it's going to be very valuable as a skill. So, and I think that if a lot of us get good at it, we can have a lot of fun with it. So anyway, there we go. Thank you to our producers for all the great questions. That was a great conversation, and it's all mostly your fault. The other people that we'll blame for the good conversation are the panelists. So thank you for the panelists. We can't do this without you. And now we're going to jump into after hours. All right, see you.